Today, we're going to dive into one of history's great paradoxes. It's a story about a city that literally gave the world democracy and then turned around and used that very democracy to sentence its most famous philosopher to death.
This one sentence, this was Socrates' entire mission. He believed that the only life truly worth living was one filled with constant questioning and self-reflection. But, this wasn't some quiet, personal journey for him. Oh no. For Socrates, it was a loud, very public, and, as it turns out, a deeply disruptive mission. And that right there is the core mystery. How could Athens, the very cradle of free thought, turn on the one man who seemed to be its greatest champion? Why would a democracy choose to kill its own conscience? That's the question we're going to unravel today.
Now, to even begin to answer that, we first have to understand the city itself. Because at the end of the 5th century BCE, Athens was this place of incredible, mind-blowing brilliance. But it was also a city dealing with some deep, deep trauma. First off, forget everything you know about modern democracy. In ancient Athens, there were no representatives, no one to vote on your behalf. Citizens, we're talking thousands of them, would gather to vote directly on everything. Justice was handled the same way, with these massive juries of 500 people or even more. So in a city like this, public opinion wasn't just important, it was literally everything. And right into this buzzing, hyper-opinionated city walks a man whose entire purpose in life was to challenge those very opinions. A man who called himself a gadfly, sent by the gods to sting the lazy horse of the state back into action. From what we know, Socrates was a pretty odd sight. He wasn't some wealthy academic giving lectures from an ivory tower. He was a stonecutter who wandered the marketplace barefoot, starting conversations with anyone and everyone. While other thinkers were looking up at the stars, Socrates was looking into the human soul. He didn't care what the world was made of, he cared about how we ought to live. And his whole philosophy started from this incredible, revolutionary idea. True wisdom begins the moment you admit you know nothing. And he had this powerful and, let's be honest, deeply uncomfortable way of revealing that ignorance in other people. We call it the Socratic Method. The goal wasn't to win an argument. Nope. The goal was to take it apart, piece by painful piece, with a relentless string of questions, until the person he was talking to had to admit they didn't really know what they were talking about in the first place. So let's see how this actually worked. Just imagine Socrates walking up to a celebrated general in the middle of a public square, a guy famous for his bravery, and asking him a question that sounds deceptively simple. So the general gives a confident, textbook answer. It's exactly what you'd expect a war hero to say. It seems like a perfectly solid definition. But for Socrates, this is just the opening move. And boom, with that one question, the trap is sprung. The general has to agree, right? And just like that, his confident, neat little definition of courage has completely fallen apart. Now imagine that kind of humiliation playing out not in private, but in front of a crowd. Imagine it happening to powerful politicians, to famous poets, day after day. Socrates wasn't just making enemies, he was chipping away at the authority of the city's most important people. But look, just making powerful people angry isn't usually enough to get you executed. To really understand why Athens turned on Socrates, we need to look at the immense trauma the city had just been through. For nearly 30 years, Athens was stuck in this devastating war with its rival, Sparta. It ended in a total, humiliating defeat. The city's walls were torn down. Its empire was gone. Then Sparta installed a brutal puppet government, the 30 Tyrants, who started a reign of terror, executing their political rivals. By the time democracy finally came back, Athens was a city haunted by its own ghosts. It was paranoid, angry, and desperately looking for someone to blame for it all. And this is where Socrates' past became a huge liability. Two of the most hated men in recent Athenian history had been in his circle. Critias, the bloodthirsty leader of the 30 Tyrants, was a former student. And so was Alcibiades, a brilliant general who ended up betraying Athens and going over to Sparta's side. In the paranoid mood of the city, a toxic question started to bubble up. Is the teacher responsible for the crimes of his students? And so, in the year 399 BCE, with the city still on edge, 3 citizens dragged Socrates to court, forcing him to defend his entire life's work in front of a jury of his peers. On paper, the official charges were about religion and morality, impiety, for not respecting the city's gods, introducing new deities, which was probably a reference to his daimonion, this inner spirit he claimed guided him. And then there was the most dangerous charge, corrupting the youth of Athens. But everybody knew what this was really about. This was a political trial dressed up as a moral one. The real accusation was that his constant questioning had poisoned an entire generation and weakened the very foundations of their democracy. So, after all the arguments were made, that huge jury of 501 citizens cast their votes. The result was, well, it was shockingly close. Socrates was found guilty, but only by a very narrow margin. Just 30. That's it. That's the number of votes that sealed his fate. If just 30 of those jurors had changed their minds, Socrates would have walked away a free man. This wasn't some unanimous cry for blood. He was condemned by the narrowest of margins, a perfect reflection of a city completely at war with itself. But getting convicted wasn't the end of it. The Athenian system actually gave Socrates a chance to save his own life. Both sides, the prosecution and the defense, would propose a penalty, and then the jury would choose between the two. The prosecution, of course, demanded death. All Socrates had to do was propose a reasonable alternative, like exile. Most people would have. But he refused to bend. In this incredible act of pure defiance, he argued that for his service to Athens, he didn't deserve a punishment, he deserved a reward, free meals for life at public expense. It was a breathtakingly bold, or maybe just arrogant, move. The jury was furious. The next vote, well, it wasn't close at all. They sentenced him to die. But even then, he had one last chance. His wealthy friends bribed the guards and arranged an escape. He could have just fled into exile, but he refused. His logic was unshakable. He had lived his entire life as a citizen of Athens, protected by its laws. To run away now would be to say that the laws only matter when they work in your favor. For Socrates, there were only two honorable choices. Either persuade your city that a law is unjust, or you obey it, even if that law costs you your life. Surrounded by his devastated students, Socrates calmly drank a cup of poison hemlock and died. But in killing the man, Athens made the philosopher immortal. His death wasn't an end. It was the single act that forged his entire legacy. His student, Plato, was so horrified by what he saw as basically mob rule that he dedicated his life's work to figuring out a better way for people to govern themselves. Through Plato's writings, Socrates was transformed from a convicted criminal into a martyr for truth, the ultimate symbol of intellectual courage. And that Socratic method he pioneered? It would become the blueprint for critical thinking in the Western world. And his legacy isn't stuck in some dusty history book. The Socratic method is a living, breathing tool. It's the engine that drives law school classrooms. It's the framework for scientific debate. It's that simple, powerful technique used by every teacher who asks why, to push a student to think just a little bit deeper. It's the ghost of a barefoot philosopher still walking through our halls of learning today. And so we're left with the same question that has echoed down through history for thousands of years. Was Athens right to see him as a threat? A corrosive force whose constant questioning was tearing apart an already fragile society? Or was he the ultimate man of principle, a hero so committed to truth that he chose to die rather than back down? The trial of Socrates is over, but the verdict on his legacy, well, that's something every generation has to decide for itself.